There is a room in this school that the story walks past for most of its first season without ever quite explaining, and it is the most powerful room in the building. It has a projector screen. It has blinds that close. It has a long table and good chairs and the kind of quiet that only exists in places where decisions actually get made, and every person sitting at that table is a teenager. Tonight we are going to spend a long, slow evening inside that room. Not just what the student council is, though we will get to the mechanics of it, and they are stranger than most people realize. What this is really about is the two people who ran it, and the fact that they wanted the same chair for completely opposite reasons, and that the argument between them is the closest thing this series has to a debate about whether the school itself is a good idea. So let us start with the boring part, which turns out not to be boring at all, which is what this council can actually do. The description the school gives is bland enough. A group of elected students who address issues of concern and hold special meetings between the classes. Committee language, the kind of sentence that makes you think of budget requests and poster campaigns for a sports day. And then, quietly in the same paragraph, comes the part that changes the shape of everything. When necessary, they can call for the expulsion of other students. Not recommend, not raise a concern with a teacher who then decides. They can call for it. And it goes further than that, because the school is explicit that when a student is caught breaking the rules, the person who makes the final decision about the punishment is not a member of staff. It is the student council president. Which means that in a school full of adults who have been given enormous latitude to run social experiments on children, there is one office where a 17-year-old outranks every teacher in the building on the single question that matters most, which is whether you get to stay. And the teachers know it. Even the faculty are respectful toward the council's members, and particularly toward its president. Not polite, respectful. There is a difference, and you can hear it in every scene where a teacher and the president are in the same room. To understand why that authority is as heavy as it is, you have to remember what kind of place this is, because it is easy to forget when the story is busy being about examinations. Advanced Nurturing High School was established by the Japanese government to produce graduates who will support the country. It reports 100% employment and college entry rate. Its campus covers something in the region of 600,000 square meters, which is not a school so much as a small district, and the students who enter it do not leave. They live on site. They are forbidden from going beyond the campus except on specific occasions. And they are forbidden from contacting anybody outside, anybody at all, including their own families. So consider what that means for a student in trouble. There is no parent to telephone. There is no outside authority to appeal to. There is no adult in your life who is not employed by this institution. If you are accused of something, the entire universe of people who can decide what happens to you is contained inside a fence, and at the top of that structure, holding the final say on punishment, is another child. That is the office, not a committee with a budget, the last word inside a sealed world. And the sorting the whole school runs on is stranger than it first appears, too. The letters are not permanent. Class A through D are provisional labels, reassigned according to class points, so the class currently holding the highest total is called Class A and the others fall in behind it, which means nobody is born into anything here. The top class is simply whoever is winning, and the school will happily relabel all four of them if the numbers move. And if you cannot climb, you can buy. A student may purchase the right to transfer into whichever class they choose. The price is 20 million private points. Hold that number somewhere, because this school uses it more than once, and every time it appears it is being used to put a price on a person. Now hold that thought and add one more piece of information, because on its own it is a curiosity, and next to everything else it is the key to the whole story. Every student council president in the history of this school has graduated from Class A. Everyone, not most, not a strong majority. In the entire recorded history of an institution built specifically to sort human beings into a ranking, the person holding that particular office has never once finished anywhere but the top. Sit with that for a moment, because there are two ways to read it and the series never tells you which is correct. The first is that it is a filter. The council only takes exceptional people. Exceptional people end up in Class A, and the correlation means nothing more than that. The second reading is considerably more interesting. It is that the office is not a reward for reaching Class A, it is one of the ways you get there. That the authority, the information, the access, the ability to look down at the whole year from a room with good chairs, is worth enough that anyone holding it who is even moderately competent simply cannot lose. And if that second reading is the true one, then the presidency is not an honor. It is the most valuable thing in the school, and there is exactly one of it, and every year there is a queue. It is worth describing the room itself for a moment, because the furniture tells you what it is for. There is a large U-shaped table with comfortable seats. There is a projector. There are window blinds that close automatically, and it sits somewhere near the swimming pool, which is one of the few areas on campus not under surveillance, though the story never makes anything of that particular adjacency. A U-shaped table is not a meeting table. A meeting table is a rectangle, and everybody sits around it. A U is the shape you use when people are going to be brought in and addressed, so that the room can look at them from 3 sides while they stand in the gap. It is a shape for hearings. And one of the listed functions of that room, in the school's own description, is to hold regular meetings with the leaders of the successful classes of each year level. Not all the classes, the successful ones. So somewhere in that building on a schedule, the top of every year sits down together in a room with good chairs and closes the blinds and talks, and the students in the lower classes are simply not part of the conversation and are not told it is happening. There are a few more rules worth knowing, because they matter later in ways you will not see coming. The council usually takes on 2 first-year students. If you apply and you are rejected, that is not final. You can apply again and again after that, and nobody holds it against you. And then there is the last provision, which is the strangest and best of them. If the president personally rejects your application, the vice president gets to make the final decision. Think about what that is. That is a deliberate written check on the authority of the most powerful student in the school, built into the council's own structure by whoever designed it. The president cannot unilaterally decide who sits at that table. The second in command can overrule them on the way in. That door exists for a reason. Remember it. Because one of the 2 men in this story is going to end up with a vice president who cannot stand him, and the school built that door itself. So, the first man. When the story begins, the president of the student council is a 3rd year named Manabu Horikita, and the very first authority figure this entire series shows us is him. Not a teacher, not the director. A student, standing in front of the incoming first years on their opening day, telling them to prepare themselves for the year ahead. He is tall, with black hair swept to one side and violet eyes behind square-rimmed glasses, and he carries himself like a man who has never in his life been late for anything. He is 19. He holds a 5th dan in karate and a 4th dan in aikido, which are serious ranks for a man in his 20s and remarkable ones for somebody still at school. And within the first few episodes, we see him do something that quietly establishes the scale of his attention. He watches Class D from his office. Not out of concern, as a matter of routine. He looks down into the lowest class in the year, notes what is happening there, and then turns to praise 2 first-year students, Sakayanagi and Katsuragi, on their recent test results. On day 1, before anything has happened, the president has already read the entire year, has already identified which 2 first years are worth speaking to, and has already been through the results of a class that nobody else in the building considers worth the paper. That is the man, and the first time we watch him deal with a person rather than a system, it goes extremely badly. Because his younger sister is in Class D. The scene is short, and it is one of the ugliest things in the first season. Suzune finds him. She is nervous in a way we do not see from her again for a long time, and she tries to tell him that she has changed, that she is not the person she was, that her placement was not a verdict on who she is now. And he does not accept a word of it. What he tells her is not that he is disappointed in her or worried for her. What he tells her is that her being in the lowest class in the school damages his standing, his stature. That is the objection. And so he instructs her to leave the school entirely, to withdraw, to remove the problem by removing herself. She refuses. She tells him she will reach Class A no matter what it takes. And he pushes her against a wall and raises his hand. Then a boy who has no reason at all to be involved catches his wrist. What follows is over in a few seconds, and it recalibrates the entire series. Manabu, a genuine martial artist, throws strikes at a first year from Class D and does not land one. Not one. The boy does not attack. He simply is not where the hand goes, over and over, and then turns one aside firmly enough that Manabu has to step back and think. And the president stops and asks what art he studies, and gets a vague answer. And then, because his mind works the way it works, he looks at this boy's face and connects it to a set of entrance examination results he read weeks ago and found irritating, and he says so out loud. The one who scored 50 in everything. He hints, quite openly, that the scores were a decision rather than a limit. He gets nothing back. So he leaves, and on the way out he says 2 things. To the boy, nothing useful. to his sister that she needs to acknowledge her own shortcomings and work harder. He does not apologize. It does not appear to occur to him that an apology is a category of thing that exists. But he does notice, with what sounds almost like surprise, that she seems to have made a friend. That is Manabu Horikita in one scene, and it is worth being honest about him, because it is easy to soften him in retrospect, and he does not deserve it. He was prepared to strike his own sister over a class placement. His stated reason was reputational. That is who he is at the start. And here is the thing that makes him interesting rather than simply unpleasant. His snobbery is not about birth or money or the family name or which class you were sorted into on your first day. It is about effort. He is contemptuous of his sister because he believes she has not tried. He is complimentary to Sakayanagi and Katsuragi because they have. And within about 2 episodes, he is going to attempt to hand the highest office in the school to a boy from the lowest class in the year, because that boy did something clever once and did not want anyone to notice. He is a snob about work, which is a genuinely different thing from being a snob about people, and it is the difference between him and the man who takes his chair. The next time we see the council working, it is doing the thing the rules say it can do, which is deciding whether somebody stays. 3 students from Class C accuse Ken Sudo of attacking them. Class C submits the complaint to the student council, and Manabu's reaction to the arrival of this problem is not irritation, and it is not concern for the boy whose future is now on a table. He calls it exciting. He convenes the hearing. He presides over it personally, and when a teacher notes his presence he explains, straight-faced, that his schedule simply happened to allow it, which is a transparent lie and everybody in the room knows it. He is there because it is interesting. And what he does in that room is worth watching closely, because it is the only extended look we get at him actually governing. His sister is in front of him and she is frightened, and it takes her a long time to find her voice. The evidence is a photograph taken by a terrified girl from Class D. Class C's teacher dismisses it, and it is Manabu, the man presiding, who points out to that teacher that in the background of the photograph, small and easy to miss, the fight is visible. He did not have to do that. It cut against the case in front of him and helped the class his sister is in. Then, having done it, he notes that the photograph proves only that the girl was present and not who started anything, and when the argument in the room degenerates, he shuts the whole thing down as a waste of time and sets a deadline. He will decide tomorrow. If nobody comes forward before then, expulsion is on the table. That is the office working exactly as described. A student in a room with 2 teachers, deciding whether another student's education continues, on his own schedule, on his own terms. Afterwards he goes looking for the boy from the corridor, and he tells him plainly that he is disappointed. The reasoning is almost funny. He explains that when he saw Ayanokoji sitting in that hearing, he assumed there was a plan in motion, something clever, something worth watching, and what he got instead was a nervous girl and a photograph, which was fine as far as it went but was not, in his view, up to standard. He is disappointed that a first year he has met twice did not run a more sophisticated operation inside his own disciplinary hearing. He throws another strike, apparently as a form of punctuation. It misses again. And then Class C withdraws the complaint. They withdraw it suddenly and completely, and Manabu knows perfectly well that something has happened. He does not know what. He works out roughly who. And when he next runs into Ayanokoji in a corridor, he lays it out, congratulates him on the win, and gets told once again that the credit belongs entirely to his sister. He stares at him, and then, without breaking eye contact, he asks his secretary whether the student council currently has a vacancy for a secretary. She confirms that it does, and she begins to object because she can see exactly where this is going, and he silences her with a look. And he offers a seat on the student council to a first-year student from Class D. Understand what is being offered here. This is the office that decides who gets expelled. This is the room the teachers are careful in. This is the post that has never in the school's history failed to deliver its holder into Class A, and the president is handing it, unprompted, to a boy who is in the worst class in the year, on the strength of a disciplinary case that boy has repeatedly denied having anything to do with. Ayanokoji says no. He says he would prefer an ordinary school life. And Manabu, who has just been refused something that most students in that building would give a year of their lives for, does not argue. He accepts it for now, and then he says 4 words that follow this character all the way to the end of the series. "Don't disappoint me." which is, when you look at it, an extraordinary thing to say to somebody who has just turned you down. It is not a threat. It is a standing expectation, issued to a stranger, with no mechanism behind it and no way to enforce it. He simply decides that this boy is now someone whose conduct he has an opinion about and informs him. There is a person standing beside him through all of this, and she deserves a moment, because she is the only member of that first council we get to know at all. Her name is Akane Tachibana, and she is the student council's secretary. She is 19, quite short, with lilac hair tied up in 2 buns and warm brown eyes, and she is usually smiling, which makes it easy to underestimate her, and the story quietly corrects that in the middle of Sudo's hearing, when she makes her statements and her voice brings the entire room to a stop, every side of it. Class C, Class D, the teachers, and Ken Sudo himself, who is not a boy who goes quiet for anybody. She has feelings for Manabu, that is stated plainly, and it goes nowhere, and she is at his side in essentially every scene he has. She admires his abilities. She is also visibly a little frightened of him, and the moment you see it is when she starts to question his decision to offer a council seat to a Class D student, and he turns and looks at her, and she stops mid-sentence. That is a small thing, and it says a great deal. The person closest to the most powerful student in the school, the one who works beside him daily and is fond of him, can be silenced by a glance. And it is worth knowing, before we get anywhere near what happens to her, that this is who she is, not a functionary, a girl who takes the job seriously enough to quiet a room, standing next to a man she cares about who has never once noticed. There is one more thing about that recruitment, incidentally, because Manabu tried twice. The second attempt comes later, during a summer break, when the council is busy reorganizing, and he runs into Ayanokoji in the school uniform he is still wearing in the holidays because the work does not stop, and what he offers the second time is not the secretary's seat. He offers to make him a second vice president. Tachibana, who is present, is already annoyed that this first year is speaking to the president with no deference whatsoever, and then has to stand there and listen to her superior propose handing the second highest office in the school to a boy from the bottom class, and then watch him refuse it again. Twice, the most powerful student in the building tried twice to hand real institutional power to somebody who did not want it, and was turned down both times because it sounded like work. There is one more image of him from that first season that I have always liked, because it is the office at its most physical. At the swimming pool, students from Class A and Class C start pushing at each other over Sudo, and it is about 3 seconds from becoming a real fight, and Manabu arrives by jumping from the upper floor and landing between the 2 class leaders. He does not shout. He points out that although everyone is currently enjoying themselves, this is still school grounds, and it stops. Instantly, 2 of the most aggressive students in the year simply stand down, because the man who dropped in front of them can decide whether they are still enrolled next week. And then his sister makes a speech to the students around her about how Class D can reach Class A. He hears all of it. And his response, the entire content of his reaction to his sister, publicly committing herself to the thing he told her was impossible, is to look at her. She looks back the same way, and that is the conversation. And there is one more measure of what that office weighs, which does not involve a hearing at all. There is a boy in the first year named Kakeru Ryuan. He runs his class through fear. He is surrounded at all times by people who will do violence on his instruction, and across 3 seasons, the number of students who can make him back down without a fight can be counted on one hand. Manabu Horikita can do it by being present. Not by threatening him. He simply arrives and Ryuan recalculates and the situation ends, because whatever Ryuan is willing to risk, and it is a great deal, he is not willing to hand the student council president a reason to convene a hearing about him. And the other measure is the one closest to home. Suzune Horikita is by temperament more or less unfrightenable. Threats slide off her. Ryuan's entire method has no purchase on her at all, and there is exactly one person in this story who can put fear into her, and it is her own brother, and he does it without appearing to try. So that is the shape of the man at the top of this institution in the first year. He can end a fight by dropping into the middle of it. He can quiet a delinquent by walking into the room. He can decide, personally, whether a boy he has never spoken to remains enrolled. And the only person he has ever raised a hand to is the one member of his family inside the fence with him. Now, before we leave him, there are 2 decisions he made about the membership of that council that look like small administrative footnotes and are actually the beginning of the war. The first, Katsuragi, the boy who is generally regarded as the second sharpest mind in the first year, applied to the student council and was rejected. Nobody in the story can work out why. It seems perverse. He is exactly the sort of person the council exists to collect. The reason surfaces much later, and it is pure strategy. Manabu did not want Katsuragi in that room, because in that room Katsuragi would be within reach of the vice president, and the vice president was a man Manabu was already fighting. He blocked the second best mind in the year out of the most valuable post in the school, permanently, purely to keep an asset out of his rival's hands. The second, Honami Ichinose, wanted to join the student council. She is warm, she is universally liked, she is the leader of an entire class and one of the few students in that building who is trusted by all four of them, and Manabu rejected her. That is where he leaves it. Two of the most promising students of their year, turned away from the table by a man who was, on the evidence, using the membership list as a weapon. And when he graduates, both of those decisions will be reversed by his successor, for reasons that could not be more different. So who was he in the end? Here is how he describes himself in the novels, in a passage that the anime never gives him, and that I think explains him completely. He says that for better or worse, he has lived his entire life making certain never to stir anything up, being a role model, being exemplary, that he believed this was the right thing to do and never once questioned it, and that by the time he was approaching graduation, he had already given up on taking any action at all. And then he says the part that lands. That he had failed to make a single friend, he could say, he trusted from the bottom of his heart. That is the man who ran the most powerful office in this school for a year, not corrupt, not cruel exactly, though he came close in a corridor with his sister. Simply somebody who understood the rules so completely and believed in them so totally that he arrived at the end of 3 years having governed a building full of people without ever managing to know one of them. He kept the machinery clean. He believed the latter was real because for him it had been, and he did not notice until very near the end that the person waiting directly beneath him in his own council had spent the entire time looking at that same machinery and reaching an entirely different conclusion, that the rules were not what made the school work, that they were the thing standing in the way of what the school could be. And that the fastest way to find out which of them was right was to take the chair and see. His name is Miyabi Nagumo, and the first thing to understand about him is the thing almost everybody skips, because it is buried in a single line of background, and it explains the entire man. He did not start in Class A. He entered this school as a Class B student, which means that everything he becomes, every ounce of the authority he eventually holds over 3 years of students, every point of the enormous confidence he carries around like a coat, was built by somebody who arrived here and was told on his first day that he was second best. He climbed, and people who have climbed a ladder tend to have opinions about ladders that people born at the top of one never develop. He is tall, a little taller than most, with light blonde hair and pale blue eyes, and he is handsome in a way the story keeps commenting on. He has a reputation as a womanizer, and it is deserved, and a good portion of the school thinks well of him anyway. He uses people's first names almost immediately after meeting them, which sounds like warmth and is actually a small, constant assertion of position. He holds handshakes a beat too long. He is the sort of person who is always, in every conversation, very slightly closer to you than you agreed to. And by the time the story properly introduces him, in the 6th episode of the 2nd season, he is already the vice president of the student council, sitting directly beneath Manabu Horikita, waiting. What he believes is worth stating carefully, because the easy version of Nagumo is that he is simply the villain of the upper years, and the actual version is more uncomfortable than that. His deputy eventually explains the promise he made to his year. It is this: anyone who surpasses the boundaries between the classes, anyone who reaches across and builds alliances outside their own class, will be pulled up into Class A. Now sit with that for a moment, because it is not stupid, and it is not obviously wrong. This school takes 400 children a year, sorts them into 4 boxes on day 1 on criteria it refuses to disclose, and then tells them that the boxes are permeable, while making it almost impossible in practice to move between them. Nagumo looks at that arrangement and says, essentially, that the walls are artificial, that cooperation is being punished by design, and that the person holding the most powerful office in the school ought to be using it to tear the walls down rather than to keep them tidy. That is a real argument. Plenty of students found it persuasive, and they were not fools for doing so. And it is also, when you look at what it produced, a patronage machine, because the promise is not that the school's rules will change. The promise is that Nagumo will pull you up. The mechanism is him. The route to Class A runs through a single person's goodwill, and the price of that goodwill is loyalty to that person. He did not abolish the hierarchy. He put himself at the top of a new one and made it personal. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and the series never resolves them, and it is much better for it. What is not ambiguous is how he treats the people who sign up. The word the story uses is toys. He makes the people around him into toys, and he is not reluctant to damage them or to spend them when it becomes useful. His own predecessor came to suspect that of the 12 students his year lost, Nagumo had a hand in the expulsion of 7 of them in one way or another. That is a suspicion rather than a count, and I want to be careful about it, because Manabu never proved it, and the story never confirms it. But the significant thing is not whether the number is exactly right. It is that the outgoing president of the student council looked at his own deputy and privately concluded that the man was quietly clearing his own year and could not do anything about it. And then there is the winter and the exam that shows you precisely how his mind works. The mixed training camp is 8 days at an outdoor school in the mountains, 3 hours from campus by bus in the middle of winter. Boys in one building, girls in another, and nobody permitted to leave without permission. The days start at 4 in the morning if your group is on breakfast duty, and at 6 if it is not, and they run through cleaning and seated meditation, and 4 hours of study, and 7 hours of assignments, and dinner and a bath and lights out at 10. It is a monastery with an examination at the end of it. The structure is the important part. Students form small groups, and every small group has to contain students from at least 2 different classes. Those small groups then merge into large groups of 30 to 45 people spanning all 3 school years. Each small group names a leader, and at the end of it there is one comprehensive examination, and your large group is scored on the average of every single member's result. First years, second years, third years, all averaged together. So your fate is now bound to people you have never met, from years above you, whose competence you cannot assess and whose effort you cannot control. And then comes the penalty, which is the reason this exam matters. The leader of the small group that drags the last-placed large group below the line is expelled. And that leader may name one other person from their group to be expelled alongside them, under joint responsibility. The rewards for the record are generous at the top and brutal at the bottom. First place earns every member of the group 10,000 private points and 3 class points. Second place 5,001. Third place 3,000 and nothing. And then it inverts. Fourth place loses 5,000. Fifth loses 10,000 and 3 class points. Sixth loses 20,000 private points and 5 class points, and every single person in that group takes the hit. There is even an incentive built in to mix. If a small group is made up of 2 classes, the top 3 placements pay out as listed, 3 classes and the reward doubles, 4 classes and it triples, and the classmates of whoever is named leader receive double again. Which is worth noticing, because the school is here explicitly paying students to cooperate across class lines. The same school that spends the rest of the year making cooperation nearly suicidal. Somebody in the second year is going to build an entire political philosophy out of that contradiction, and this exam is where he gets to test it. There is a way out, there is always a way out in this school, and it is always priced to be almost impossible. A cancellation of expulsion can be purchased. It costs 20 million private points, and it costs 300 class points. Say both of those numbers slowly, because the second one is the real barrier. Private points are money, and money can be pooled and borrowed and hoarded. Class points are the thing every class in the school spends the entire year trying to accumulate, the actual measure of standing, the thing that determines whether you climb or fall. 300 of them spent to keep one student enrolled is a devastating price. It is designed so that saving somebody costs you the year. Now Nagumo at this point makes a bet with Manabu, and he loses it. Among the boys, Manabu's large group finishes first, Nagumo's finishes second. Straightforwardly, publicly, the president beat his deputy in an open contest. The bet is settled, and Nagumo pays it. But while that was happening, on the other side of the mountain, something else had been arranged. Because on the girls' side, the last-placed large group contained 2 people in particular. One was a third year from Class B named Ikari Momoko, who was the leader of her small group, and who therefore fell under the expulsion rule automatically. And the other was a third year from Class A named Akane Tachibana. Akane Tachibana was Manabu Horikita's secretary, the one who stood beside him in the corridors, the one who objected when he offered a council seat to a first year from Class D and was silenced with a look. She was named for joint responsibility. Both expulsions were formally announced, and neither of them happened because both were bought out. And I want to slow down on how Tachibana was saved, because the story does something quietly moving with it that is very easy to read past. It was not Manabu who paid, not personally and not alone. Every student in third-year Class A agreed to it, all of them. The entire class sat down and consented to hand over 20 million private points and 300 class points in their final year, in the class that was currently at the top of the school, to keep one girl enrolled. 300 class points in their last year is not a gesture. It is a substantial share of everything they had spent 3 years building, and they were close enough to the end that there was very little time left to earn it back. They knew exactly what it cost. They voted for it anyway. So the girl who used to bring an entire hearing to silence with her voice, and who is a little frightened of the man she works beside, and who nobody in the story ever pays much attention to, turns out to be somebody an entire class of the most capable students in the school will impoverish themselves for without much apparent hesitation. That is the other half of the ledger, and it belongs next to the strategy. Nagumo engineered a situation in which a girl he had no quarrel with would be removed as collateral, and what it actually revealed was that 40 people would pay almost anything to keep her. Now think about what has actually been done here, because it is the neatest thing Nagumo does in the entire series, and he does it while losing. He lost the bet, he lost the boys' competition. He came second in a 2-horse race in front of the whole school, and in exchange for that loss, he forced the president of the student council to spend 20 million private points and 300 class points to keep his own secretary in the building. He took a defeat that cost him a wager and converted it into a wound in his rival's accounts that will not close for a year. The phrase the story attaches to him fits exactly. He believes in winning the war at the expense of a battle. And here is the detail I find quietly chilling. Nobody worked out what he had done, not the teachers, not Manabu until afterwards. One person in that entire mountain school understood the shape of the plan while it was happening, and it was a first year who was not supposed to be paying attention and who did nothing about it because it was not his business. And it should be said, in fairness to him, that the traffic went both ways that week, because Nagumo noticed something too. Among all the small groups on that mountain, he picked out one and worked out that its named leader was a formality, that the boy holding the title was not the one making the decisions, and that the actual direction was coming from somewhere else inside the group, from someone who had arranged not to hold the title at all. He was right, he did not identify who, and it would be another year and a half before he got anywhere near an answer. But he looked at a group of 15 people from 3 different classes and correctly read that its command structure was a decoration. That is not a bully's skill. That is genuine, and it is worth putting on the record now, because the last thing Nagumo does in this story is going to make him look like a fool, and he did not get to where he is by being one. He is calm at that camp. He is methodical. There is none of the swagger he shows later. He runs a complex, patient, multi-front operation over 8 days in a mountain monastery, loses the headline contest deliberately enough that nobody questions it, and walks away having wounded his rival in a way that will not heal. The arrogance comes later. It is not the engine. It is what grows on him once there is nobody left in the school who can tell him no. The same first year in the same week, watched Nagumo play a card game with people and noticed that he was marking the joker. That is worth holding onto. In a school where a boy can arrange for 2 students in another year to be expelled as a way of losing gracefully, that same boy will also cheat at Old Maid, not for stakes, because he is playing, and playing is what he does with people. It is also, incidentally, the first exam Class D sits after being promoted to Class C, which is a small thing, but the timing is nice. The second thing Nagumo does is the one that echoes furthest, and it is done with almost no effort at all. He talks to Honami Ichinose. She is a first year, she is the leader of Class B, she is one of the most genuinely decent people in the building, and she is carrying something from her past that she has told nobody, and Nagumo, with very little prior contact, gets it out of her. The story is honest about why it worked, and it is not flattering to either of them. He is extremely persuasive, and she is trusting to a degree that shades into gullible, and she wanted to believe that somebody in a position of authority was on her side. So she told him, and he listened, and then he gave it to Arisu Sakayanagi. I want to be precise about that chain, because it gets attributed to the wrong person constantly. The information goes from Ichinose to Nagumo to Sakayanagi. And what Sakayanagi does with it is the long, methodical, publicly staged dismantling of Honami Ichinose that occupies a large part of the 3rd season. Nagumo does not participate in that. He does not need to. He handed over a weapon and went back to his own year, and a girl in the first year was taken apart with it over a period of weeks, and none of it costs him anything at all. That is what the word toys means when the story uses it about him, not cruelty for its own sake, something colder. A person told him something that had been hurting her for years, and he filed it, and when it became useful he spent it, and there is no evidence he thought about it again. And then, later in that same year, he goes back to her. The class poll is running, the examination where each class must remove somebody, and Ichinose's class can avoid sacrificing anyone if it can raise 20 million private points. They cannot. They are short by a very specific amount, 4,043,019 points, and Nagumo comes to her with exactly that sum. The price is that she becomes his girlfriend. I am going to leave the description there, because it does not improve on closer inspection. A girl is watching her class be forced to expel one of their own, and the most powerful student in the school arrives with the precise amount of money required to prevent it, attached to himself. It does not work. Ayanokoji finds her a different lender, the arrangement collapses, and the story notes that Nagumo was livid, which is one of the very few times we hear that word about him. Not because the plan failed, because somebody had reached into his year and taken something out of his hand. So that is the man who is going to inherit the student council, and he does inherit it, because Manabu is a third year and third year's graduate, and the chair passes to the vice president the way it always has. Except that the school built a door, and Nagumo has to walk somebody through it. Because when he becomes president, he needs a vice president of his own, and the person who takes that seat is a student named Ikuto Kiriyama. Kiriyama is quiet and unremarkable to look at, black hair swept to one side, and he arrives in the third season without much fanfare. Two facts about him matter enormously, and neither is announced. The first is that he used to be in Class A, and he is not anymore. The story never tells us what happened. It simply notes it, in passing, as a fact about his past, and leaves you to sit with the knowledge that somewhere in the 2 years before we meet him, Ikuto Kiriyama fell out of the top class in his year, and has opinions about it. The second is that he idolizes Manabu Horikita, genuinely, uncomplicatedly, in the way that people idolize someone who represents an idea they have decided to believe in, and what Manabu represents to him is the position that the rules of this school must be preserved, not obeyed, preserved, actively defended against the person currently trying to rewrite them. So the vice president of Nagumo's student council is a man who wants Nagumo removed. And he did not arrive there by accident, because before he graduated, Manabu Horikita introduced Kiriyama to Ayanokoji himself, personally, for the express purpose of taking Nagumo down. Read that again because of everything the outgoing president does. This is the most audacious. On his way out of the school, having failed to recruit Ayanokoji twice, having been refused a council seat twice, Manabu takes his successor's own second in command and hands him to a first year from the bottom class as a resource for use in a war he will not be present for. The first meeting between them is wonderfully awkward. Kiriyama picks a private place and a private time, and Ayanokoji turns up with Kei Karuizawa in tow, which is not what anybody expected. Kiriyama decides not to make an issue of it. They negotiate terms, and then Kiriyama says the quiet part out loud, which is that he looks down on Ayanokoji for being a Class D student, and that Manabu may well have misjudged him. And then he agrees to work with him anyway, on the grounds that his idol saw something he cannot, and that this is probably a reason to defer rather than to argue. He is explicit that this arrangement lasts exactly as long as his patience. The moment he judges Ayanokoji incapable, it ends. And while all of that is going on beneath him, Nagumo fills the rest of his council, and the composition of it is worth sitting with for a moment, because of who is now sitting in that room. Honami Ichinose is on the student council. She joined as first-year representative, brought in by the man who had listened to the worst thing that ever happened to her, and then handed it to somebody who used it to take her apart in public over a period of weeks. And there is no indication that she knows. She goes to the meetings. She does the work because she is Ichinose, and that is what she does with anything she is given. And she sits at that U-shaped table with the person responsible for the worst months of her life, and by every sign in the story, she thinks of him as an ally. So look at what that room actually contains by the end of the first year. A president who is quietly clearing his own year, a vice president who idolizes the previous president and is actively feeding intelligence to a first year in order to bring the current one down, and a first-year representative who was recruited because she was popular and pretty, whose ruin the president personally arranged, sitting between them, taking minutes. Manabu Horikita ran that office for a year and never made a friend he trusted. His successor filled it with people, and every single relationship in it was a transaction that one of the two parties did not know about. What he actually does with it is the piece that ties this whole section together, and it is easy to miss because it happens inside somebody else's storyline. During the campaign against Ichinose, the rumors that spread through the first year did not appear from nowhere. Somebody posted them, and the person who posted them on the school's own forums from his own phone was the vice president of the student council. And his reason was not to help Ichinose. He barely knows her. His reason, stated plainly, was to raise questions about the credibility of the student council. He was attacking his own institution, deliberately from the inside, holding the second highest office in the school, in order to damage the man sitting in the first one. And the final detail, which I think is the funniest thing in this entire story, is that when the school later collects the third year's stated aspirations for the coming year, Ikuto Kiriyama's answer is on the record. He says that he intends to support student President Nagumo as a member of the same council, and to aim for Class A with his own abilities. He wrote that down and put his name on it, and meant approximately none of it. Remember the rule from the council's own membership procedures. If the president rejects an applicant, the vice president makes the final decision. The school wrote a check on presidential power directly into the structure, and then a president inherited a deputy who was already committed to using every part of that structure against him. Now the two rejections from the previous administration. Katsuragi had been kept out of the council by Manabu, specifically so that Nagumo could not get to him. That decision expires the moment Manabu leaves. And Ichinose, who Manabu turned away, gets a seat. Nagumo brings her in as first-year representative, and the story is quite blunt about his selection criteria, which were that she was cute and popular. Two presidents, the same chair, the same girl. One rejected her for reasons of internal politics he never explained to her. The other installed her because she was decorative and well-liked, and then spent her. That is the difference between them, expressed entirely through an appointment. And so we arrive at the end of the third season, and the moment the whole rivalry has been building toward, which is Manabu Horikita's graduation. Because there is a fact about that ceremony that is easy to skate past. Manabu graduates from Class A. Nagumo did not stop him. For a full year, with the entire second and third year effectively under his control, with the resources of the council and the loyalty of a whole cohort bought and paid for, the man who set out to bring down Manabu Horikita did not manage to move him out of the top class. And what Nagumo does at that ceremony is, I think, the single most revealing thing he does in the series. He walks up to him in front of everyone and congratulates him, warmly. He compliments him, he shakes his hand. And when he is asked about it afterwards, and it is pointed out that Manabu graduating from Class A means Nagumo lost, he does not accept the framing at all. He says they were never really competing, because they were in different years, and the contest was never symmetrical. He says that what he actually wanted was Manabu's respect. That he considers Manabu invincible, and wanted to be his rival, and that there is nobody in the second year or the first year who is remotely at that level. And then he says what he is going to do now, which is that with Manabu gone there is nothing left for him but to change the school into a true meritocracy. The two of them, briefly, both express something close to regret that they were not born in the same year. And then a bus takes one of them away, and the other one is left holding the most powerful office in the school, with nobody left in the building who can meaningfully oppose him. No president above him, no rival in his own year. A cohort of third years who cannot rebel because he controls their route to Class A, a vice president who despises him and whom he does not suspect. He has, at last, exactly what he wanted, a school with no one in it capable of telling him no. And the following spring, a second-year girl who has just lost a bet is going to walk into that room and take a seat at the table, because a boy she trusts asked her to, for reasons he does not explain to her, that were originally somebody else's idea entirely. Her name is Suzune Horikita, and she does not want to be there. The bet was over a written examination. She had grown suspicious that the boy sitting beside her was not contributing anything to the class he had promised to raise, and she wanted to measure him, so she challenged him directly on any subject he liked. He accepted and asked for one wish if he won, and would not say what it was, and told her that the subject did not matter because the result would be the same either way. He got 100 out of 100 on a mathematics paper that nobody in the school's history had ever completed. She got 87, which was the second highest mark in the class. And the wish he chose, having beaten her, was that she join the student council. It is worth walking slowly through where that request actually came from, because it did not originate with him either. Her brother on his last day had told Ayanokoji two things. The first was that Nagumo was unruly with his power and that somebody would need to be watching. The second, on his way to the bus, was that Suzune was in his care. So Manabu Horikita, who could not recruit Ayanokoji and could not reach his sister, arranged the thing anyway. He raised the concern with a boy who owed him nothing, and that boy waited 4 months, engineered a bet, spent a perfect score he had been hoarding for 2 years, and used his winnings to put Manabu's sister inside Manabu's old office. Which means that the last act of governance by the previous administration is carried out a year after it ended, by the president's sister, on the instruction of a first year he twice failed to hire, for reasons she is never fully told. And she walks in, and the man behind the desk is delighted to see her. Nagumo's reaction to Suzune Horikita joining his council is not suspicion. He does not appear to consider, even briefly, that she might be there as anyone's instrument. What he registers is that Manabu Horikita's little sister is now formally, structurally, directly beneath him. He takes open pleasure in it. Her brother is gone, and here is the next best thing, seated at his table, reporting to him. He is also, in his usual way, extremely interested in her personally. He uses her first name almost immediately. He holds a handshake longer than a handshake requires. He is the same man he has always been, and it is no less unpleasant for being predictable. And she takes the job seriously, which is the part I find genuinely touching about it. Because she does not have to. She was placed there as somebody else's chess move, on a bet she did not want to lose, to monitor a man she has no personal quarrel with, for reasons that were never explained to her in full. She could have attended, said nothing, and let the term pass. Instead, she does what she does with everything, which is to treat it as a thing worth being good at. She goes to the meetings. She takes on the work. She sits in the room her brother used to run and learns how it operates, and by the end of the year she understands the machinery of that office better than anyone else in her year. There is something almost tender in it, if you have followed her from the beginning. This is a girl whose entire opening character was that she wanted to be her brother, and who spent a year being told by him that she was a disgrace, and who finally cut her hair and announced that she was going to stop imitating him and be herself instead. And then, months later, she walks into his old office of her own accord and starts doing his old job properly. Not because she is copying him anymore, because somebody asked her to do something difficult, and she is the sort of person who does it well. And that is the shape of the second year. The office that decided whether students stayed enrolled, that outranked the faculty on discipline, that had never once failed to deliver its holder into Class A, now belongs entirely and unopposed to Miyabi Nagumo. There is no president above him. There is nobody in his own year who can challenge him, and he says so out loud, repeatedly. His third-year classes cannot rebel, because he holds the only route any of them still have to Class A, which means he can call on their private points, and their bodies, and their time whenever he wants them. He does try to add one more piece, and fails, and the failure is instructive. There is a third year named Fukakiri Yuen who is, by the school's own assessment, the only student in the building carrying the highest possible overall rating. She's also completely uninterested in any of it. She does not attend to her class. She does not chase Class A. She treats the entire apparatus as mildly amusing. Nagumo approaches her to bring her onto his side. She turns him down flat. And there is nothing he can do about it, because everything he has is built on wanting something he can supply, and she does not want anything. The most powerful student in the school has no purchase whatsoever on a person with no ambition. Keep that in mind, because it comes back on a beach. Now the darker thing. At some point before the second year properly begins, the acting director of the school, a man named Tsukishiro, puts a bounty in place. 20 million private points to any first-year student who manages to have Kiyotaka Ayanokoji expelled before the second semester. And Nagumo was present when it was created. I want to be careful here because this is the detail most likely to be told wrong and the story is unusually precise about it. Nagumo did not fund it. The money was Tsukishiro's. What Tsukishiro needed was a student's face on the arrangement, because a bounty announced by an administrator is an administrator interfering with students, and a bounty endorsed by the student council president is a school matter. He needed the office. He needed the legitimacy that comes from the chair. And when Nagumo is eventually asked about it, on the island, his answer is worth quoting in shape if not in words. He says the money was Tsukishiro's, that he was simply the necessary face, and that if the target had been anybody else in the school, he would not have agreed to it. Which is either an excuse or a confession, depending on how generous you are feeling, and it is probably both. He lent the authority of the student council to an adult conspiracy to remove a specific child from the school, and his defense is that he only did it because he found that particular child interesting. Manabu spent his presidency using that office to keep the machinery clean. His successor rented it out. And notice the number, because this school only has a few, and it reuses them deliberately. 20 million private points is what it costs to buy your way into whichever class you choose. 20 million private points, plus 300 class points, is what it costs third-year Class A to keep Akane Tachibana enrolled. And 20 million private points is the standing offer to any first-year willing to remove Kiyotaka Ayanokoji from the school. Which is the school's own exchange rate, stated 3 separate times, in 3 completely different contexts. That is what a person is worth here. Getting into the top class, saving somebody from expulsion, and having somebody destroyed all cost precisely the same, and the only difference between the 3 transactions is which direction the person is being moved. Nobody in the story ever remarks on it. It is simply the price. And then everyone gets on a boat, and we arrive at the last thing the animated story has to say about Miyabi Nagumo. The second-year survival examination runs 2 weeks on an uninhabited island, with every student in the school competing simultaneously, ranked as groups. And Nagumo arrives at it with the most sophisticated plan anybody brings to that island, and it is worth admiring before we watch it come apart. He calls it the free group strategy. The insight is that a ranked competition does not only reward being high, it rewards nobody else being high. So he takes the lower-ranked third-year groups, the ones with no realistic chance of winning anything, and he simply instructs them. They exist now not to score for themselves, but to reach tasks first, to occupy places, to soak up the opportunities that would otherwise flow to other years, and to funnel what they can toward the large groups Nagumo actually cares about. One person from each group takes the arrival points to avoid the penalties, and the rest of them work for him. He can do this because of the promise. Every one of those third years is playing for a transfer to Class A that only Nagumo can authorize. Their class war is already lost, decisively, and he is the only exit left, so they do it. And he adds a refinement that is genuinely clever, and that is aimed at a person he has not identified yet. He works out that if there is an invisible competitor somewhere in the field, someone hanging deliberately just below the top 10 so as not to be noticed and then climbing at the end, the counter is to control 10th place. So he has a group hold 10th deliberately, barely, while the leaders pull away at the top. Anybody hiding below that line now has to climb through a wall that is being held at exactly the height they were trying to sit under. It works. It is precisely the strategy Ayanokoji was running, and it makes his fortnight considerably harder, and he says as much. Nagumo has always been good at this specific thing, incidentally. Back at the winter camp, he was the one who noticed that a certain small group had no genuine leader, that the person named as leader was a formality and the actual decisions were coming from somewhere else in the group. He reads structures. He is not a brute. It is important to keep that in view, because what happens on the last day is going to make him look foolish, and he did not get there by being foolish. We see him on that island a few times, and he is enjoying himself enormously. He is on the beach, playing in the water with a classmate when Ayanokoji passes by, and he calls him over to ask whether he expects to be in the top 10 when the standings are published. He is told, blandly, that a boy competing alone will probably be near the bottom, and Nagumo says the thing that tells you exactly how he sees the school. He says the real examination starts tomorrow, and that no first year and no second year has any right to be in the top 3, and that if one of them is, he will move. Not that they cannot be, that they have no right to be. The natural order in his mind is that his year is above the others, and any deviation from that is not a result but an offense to be corrected. And on the final day, he does something he has never done before, which is to walk into a situation without any of it behind him. Ayanokoji is heading for a grid reference on the far side of the island. Nagumo intercepts him alone. No free groups, no third years, nobody. He has, at that moment, a 2-point deficit at the top of the standings and a whole apparatus of subordinates awaiting instruction, and he has left all of it somewhere else because he wants to have a conversation. The conversation is about being taken seriously. That is genuinely what it is about. He wants to know what Ayanokoji is doing. He wants to demonstrate that he has worked out the hiding, and he does demonstrate it correctly, naming the trick and the counter he built for it. And underneath all of it is a man who has spent 2 years being the most important person in every room, asking a second year, in effect, to acknowledge him. He is told to go away. He is told that this is not something he should involve himself in, and that he could be expelled for it. He follows anyway. So Ayanokoji pushes him to the ground, and when he starts to get up, puts him out with a single strike to the solar plexus, sits him against a tree, and walks off. And here is the image I would ask you to hold, because it is the end of Miyabi Nagumo's story in the animated series, and it is almost unbearably quiet. He is unconscious under a tree, and lying in the sand next to him is his transceiver, still switched on, and coming out of it over and over are the voices of his third-year subordinates, the ones whose entire hope of reaching Class A rests on him, asking for instructions, asking what to do about Ko-NG, asking how to close a 2-point gap. And nobody answers them. And I promised you that Fuka Kiryuin would come back, so here she is, and the timing of it is almost too neat. Because a very short distance from where Nagumo is lying unconscious, on the same stretch of coast, on the same afternoon, 2 adults are waiting to take Kiyotaka Ayanokoji off that island permanently. And the fight that follows is not going well, and then somebody arrives who is not supposed to be there. It is her. She had broken her own tracker days earlier, so that nothing the school or anybody else could look at would show where she was, and she had followed him because she was curious about the strange movements of the first years and wanted to ask him about it. She arrives in the middle of it, works out what she is looking at, and offers to help. And she takes one of the 2 adults off him, having, by her own admission, no fighting experience whatsoever, purely because it seemed like the thing to do. Now put the 2 of them side by side, because they are on the same beach within the same hour. Miyabi Nagumo spent 2 years assembling the largest network of obligated people this school has ever seen. He bought a whole year of students with the only currency that still meant anything to them, and on the day it mattered he set all of it down and walked off alone to have a conversation about respect, and ended up unconscious under a tree with his own subordinates calling his name into the sand. Fuka Kiryuin had nothing, no faction, no leverage, no ambition, and no interest in any of it. She had turned down the most powerful student in the school when he came asking, because there was nothing he could offer her that she wanted, and she is the one who showed up. That is not a coincidence, the story points at. It never mentions it, but it is the sharpest thing in the entire arc, and it sits there quietly in the background of a fight scene, which is where this series keeps its best arguments. The final standings come in on the ship. Rokusuke Ko-NG finishes first. Miyabi Nagumo finishes second on 325 points, 2 behind. Sakayanagi's group is third, 64 points further back, which tells you how close the top 2 actually were and how far ahead of everyone else. 2 points. Now the story is careful about the causation, and so should we be. What we are told is that the reason Nagumo did not take first place was that he was injured at that grid reference and it cost him time. And what we are also told from the other side is that Ayanokoji looks at the result afterwards and thinks that his interference probably produced it. Thinks he did not plan it. He was not trying to hand anybody a victory. He removed a man from his path for a completely unrelated reason at a moment that happened to matter, and a 2-week competition involving the entire school tipped over. And so the boy with no ambition, the one nobody could buy because he wanted nothing, wins the largest examination of the year. And Nagumo, who had built an entire machine out of other people's ambition, comes second to him by 2 points because he wandered off alone to try to make somebody admire him. But that is not the number that should stay with you. Because when the results are read out, all 3 of the bottom groups are third-year groups, and none of them pay the cancellation. 15 third-year students are expelled. 15 from his own year, the year he controlled completely, the year that took his promise and worked for him, the year whose lower-ranked groups he had spent the fortnight instructing to suppress their own scores so that his large groups could stay at the top. He came second by 2 points, and it cost his cohort 15 people. Nobody in the second year was lost, not one. And the story shows us his face at that moment and tells us, honestly, that he does not look any different. Whether that is composure or whether it is simply that he had already accounted for them, we are not told, and I think the ambiguity is the point. What he does next is order the third years to follow Ayanokoji and keep tabs on him. That is where the animated story leaves the student council. Nagumo is still president. He is still in the chair, still holding the office that outranks the teachers, still owed loyalty by a year that just lost 15 of its own on his instructions. Suzune Horikita is still sitting at his table. Ikuto Kiriyama is still standing at his shoulder, still hating him, still undetected, and nothing has been resolved. So let us go back to the room, and to the question we started with, which is what that office is actually for. Two men answered it, and they gave opposite answers, and the strange thing is that each of them was right about the part the other one missed. Manabu Horikita believed the rules were the point, that the school worked, that the ladder was real and the climb was honest, and that his job as president was to keep the machinery clean enough that the climb stayed honest for everyone else. He was right about the system. He graduated from Class A, as every president before him had, and he did it against a full year of concentrated opposition from the most capable rival he ever had. And he was wrong about almost every single person in it. He was wrong about his sister, catastrophically, for 2 years. He was wrong about the boy he tried to hire and could not read. He was wrong about the deputy sitting directly beneath him, whose plans he only began to understand near the end. And by his own account, in the quietest line anyone in this series is given, he reached the end of 3 years at the top of that school without having made one friend he could say he trusted from the bottom of his heart. He kept the machine clean and never once got out of it. Miyabi Nagumo believed the rules were the obstacle, that the 4 classes were an artificial wall, that cooperation was being punished by design, and that a president who could reach across the boundaries could rebuild the entire order into something that actually measured people. And he was right about the wall. It is artificial. The school does punish cooperation. His diagnosis is genuinely better than his predecessors. And what he built was not a meritocracy. It was a court. The promise was never that the rules would change. It was that he would lift you, and the price was you. He had a vice president chosen by circumstance who wanted him gone, a rival's sister at his table for reasons he never questioned, a girl in the year below whose worst secret he spent like small change, and a whole year of students who worked for him right up until the day 15 of them were removed, and he came second by 2 points. He wanted to open the door to an order of meritocracy that had never been seen. He wrote that down as his aspiration, in his own words, for the record. And the closest he came to it was an island where he ordered the weakest people who trusted him to hold themselves down so that he could stay at the top. Both of them wanted the same chair. Both of them tried to put the same boy in it, and both were refused, twice each, because he found the work troublesome. And the only person either of them successfully placed in that room was a girl who was not trying to get there, who took the seat because she lost a bet to somebody who asked her to as a favor to a graduate who was already gone. There is a small piece of school ephemera I keep coming back to, which is that at the start of the second year, the students were asked what they were hoping for from the year ahead, and the answers were written down, and you can line them up. Nagumo's answer is exactly what you would expect and no less striking for it. He says his aim is to stir the school up and enliven it, and to open the door to an order of meritocracy that has never been seen before. It is grand, and it is sincere, and it is the language of somebody who genuinely believes he is building something. Kiriyama, standing beside him, says his aim is to support student president Nagumo as a member of the same council, and to reach Class A through his own abilities, which is, as we know, almost entirely a lie, written down in an official document by the second most powerful student in the school about the first. And the boy both presidents tried to hire, and who refused them both, says this, that he is thinking of spending the year reflecting on himself and facing himself, and that he intends to do whatever is possible to make that happen. 3 answers to the same question. One man wants to remake an institution. One man wants to destroy the person running it and is pretending to serve him. And the third, who could have had either of their jobs for the asking, wants to work out who he is. And the school quietly has kept a record on this question for its entire history. It does not say which philosophy is correct. It only says one thing, over and over, in every single year there has ever been. Whoever sat in that chair graduated from Class A. Which means the office works. It has always worked. It works for the man who believes in the rules, and it works for the man who wants to break them, and it will presumably keep working for whoever comes next, because it was never really about what any of them believed. It is a room with good chairs and a projector and a door that closes, and it makes whoever is sitting in it the most powerful person in the building, and the school hands it to a teenager every single year, and then watches with interest to see what they do. So that is the student council, not a committee, a throne with an election attached, in a school that sorts children into boxes and then gives one of them the authority to decide who stays. Manabu is gone now, on a bus, having done the one thing he could still do from outside the gate. Nagumo is in the chair with a school full of people who cannot say no to him, and a 2-point defeat he cannot explain. Kiriyama is waiting. Suzune is taking notes. And somewhere near the back of a second-year classroom, entirely uninterested in any of it, is the only student either president ever wanted for that seat, who has now turned it down twice, and who would very much like everybody to leave him alone. Sleep well.